everyone. Welcome back to Coding from Null. This week, what we're going to start covering is something called version control. And it's how we keep track of the changes that we make to our websites and applications. Now, what we're going to be using is something called Git, and specifically, we're going to be using GitHub. Now, this is going to make it much easier when we go into next week's video, when we start talking about how we actually deploy this application out to the web. But there's some basics that I think are good to cover, like how do we, what's a repo? How do we clone a repo? How do we create our own? How do we, make commits? All that sort of stuff. So a lot to cover. Let's go ahead and start jumping in.
All right, so let's start digging into how we can get this project up on GitHub. Now, one of the best reasons to use a tool like Git, and specifically with GitHub, is it's a great version control system, meaning that it keeps track of, and we'll get into this a bit more as we start talking about Git, but it keeps track of every what we call commits or changes to your code base. So if one good reason for this is if you push out a change that is a breaking change and you want to revert back, it's actually quite easy with this type of system. One of the other reasons we're going to be using this is because it's going to make it really easy for us in the next couple of videos for us to do what we call continuous deployment. And we are going to be doing that deployment. We're going to show both with Heroku and then also with Netlify, and how we can sync that up with GitHub, which makes our lives just a whole lot easier when it comes to deploying any changes to our code or deploying our code just to begin with. So one of the things that you're going to need is Git itself, so we can use that on the command line. So go ahead and go to git/csm.com, and you're going to want to download the Git bash for your specific system, whether Windows or Mac OS. And then I believe there is a setting in there that you would want to set you basically set Git to use VS Code. So that's one of the things that we're going to need. Of course, we're going to also need a GitHub account. So if you go up to GitHub, sign up for GitHub if you don't already have an account, and get that all set up. And I'm going to go ahead and sign into mine real quick, and I'll be right back. All right, so here I am in my GitHub account. Now, what we want to do is add our current project as a repository or code repository up on GitHub. And I'll show you how we do that. So up here on the plus sign, you're going to just click New Repository. We're going to go ahead and give it a name. I will just call this CFN. Actually, we'll call it Coming Soon. You get a description. You can set this to public or private. Public just means that anyone could contribute to your repository. Private means it's locked down. Initialize with the README. We don't really care about that, and we'll just hit Create Repository. Okay, now this is going to give us some nice little instructions here, which we'll kind of walk through. So the first thing that we want to do is copy this right here. So just go ahead and hit that. It will copy it into your clipboard, and then we'll go ahead and hop back over to our VS Code, and we can start initializing our Git repo. So in the project, you want to just hit Git init in the command line. So this is just reinitialized mine. It's not a big deal. Now we'll hit git add dot. And this will add all the files to our new local repository. Now we want to make our first commit. And this will go git commit -m. Now, whenever you're making a commit, it's really good practice. Get in the habit of making a concerted effort to put in a message that really outlines, exactly what you did. Don't put in a message that's just like commit or the date in a commit. That really doesn't tell you later on, and especially if you're working with other people, like what went into that commit, like what exactly was the purpose of that commit. So this one is just going to be generic because it's our first commit. So this one really doesn't matter all too much, but definitely I would say any other one, you would definitely want to put some sort of message in there that really describes what that commit was for. So that'll commit all of our changes to now our local repository that we're working on. Now, what we need to do is then get those changes up to the repository that we made on GitHub. So what we do with that, we say git remote add origin, and then we want to put in the remote repository URL. So when we're talking about the repository, so local means the local copy on your machine that you're working off of. And in this context, the remote is our repo up on GitHub. So we'll go ahead and put in that remote origin that we have on GitHub. And just to check it, we'll just say git remote -v, and this will tell us when we push to origin, it's going to push to this Git repository, which is exactly what we want to see there. And now, so we have our changes committed to our local repository, and now we want to push those changes up to our remote repository, and we're going to push that just straight to our master branch, which we'll get into a little bit more about what branches are and stuff in just a second. So we'll say git push origin master. And you'll see this will grind for a second, and then at the end we'll say that successfully matched our local master branch to our remote master branch. So now if we come back into GitHub and I go back to this repository, we can see our first commit is now populated in our remote repository, and we see all the same things that we have in our local repository, minus any files that we've put in our git ignore, like our node modules files and any of our environmental variables and things like that. So we're looking really good right now. Now what we want to do is kind of talk about what a branch is, what a pull request is, and kind of what should your workflow kind of be like when you're making changes from now on. So what a pull request is basically, it's just a request that if somebody or even yourself, which is good practice to do, if you've made changes and you push them up, you want to make a pull request to the maintainer of the code base, whether you're contributing to someone else's or even yours, which I'll show you in just a second, to pull those requests down into the master branch of that repository. Now, what a branch is really just, so you can think of this as sort of like a tree trunk, where the master branch is the tree itself, right? And that's like any of the code that we're actually pushing to production is that sort of tree trunk, right? And then any of the branches that we branch off of that. See, right now we have one branch, which is master. But if we have, a feature branch, like, okay, I'm going to branch off of master, and it's a feature I'm going to add, I don't know, search capability to my website, right? And so I'm going to branch off, and I'm going to call that, feature search or something. And then I'm going to do my work. So I'm not working in the master branch. I'm going to do my work on the feature branch. And then when I'm done and I think that all my, changes have been made, I've made all my commits. Now what I would do is then merge that feature branch into the master branch of our repository. And that's kind of just a good workflow to be in, because you can set up things like continuous integration, where it does, you could set up like checks and stuff that when you merge one branch with another, it'll run all these tests basically to see, are there any breaking changes? You could do end-to-end testing that'll be like, is something that we've changed maybe threw off our styles and now our website looks all jinky or something like that. You could do all sorts of stuff with continuous integration. So we won't go that far into it, but what we will do is create a branch and then just make a simple change, and then show how we push that branch up and how we create a pull request and how we then merge that branch when we merge that pull request. So let's go ahead and go back to VS Code, and in the terminal here, we are going to create a branch and then check it out. So you can see down here, VS Code's nice. It tells us what branch we're currently on, which is master. Remember, master on our local repository. And so we want to create a branch. So we'll say git checkout -b, and then we'll just call this chore, and then say we'll just say data changes or something. We'll just change some of the initial state. Now you'll see it'll say switch to a new branch, and then right here it tells us what branch we're on. Now if I want to go back to master, that's real easy now. I just say git checkout master, and that then switches us back to the master branch. And since we've already created that other branch, -b is a way for us to check out and create the branch at the same time. We don't need to do that this time since the branch is already created. Say initial state changes. Okay. So we're on our initial state branch now. So let's go ahead and we'll just make some real simple state changes, right? So actually what I'll do is I'll just change the date, right? So instead of December 31st, I decided, okay, I'm going to make this go live December 30th. We'll go ahead and save those changes. And so now, again, VS Code's real nice. It gives us our source control pending changes here. And if you wanted to, you could write your commit message in here, commit your changes through this little GUI that they have. But I'm going to also show you how to do that through the command line, just because there's limitations on the GUI. Like, okay, I could make a commit, but it's much harder when you start getting into the weeds of checking out branches and all that sort of stuff. And it's much faster and much more efficient, I think, just by doing everything in the command line, in my own opinion. So we will say git commit -m, and then our message, and we'll just say chore changed countdown update. See how I'm being a bit more specific about what I'm doing. I like to use little tags in my, these little tag messages in my commits. Like, is this a feature? Is this a bug fix? Is this just a chore? Like I got to clean something up. Everyone has their kind of own practice, but it's good to have some sort of workflow that you're constantly doing, so you know that when you look back at your source control, it actually makes sense to you and you can figure out kind of what you were doing when you made those changes. But anyway, so we'll go ahead and these aren't staged, so I'll just do it through here so you can stage the changes. And then I'll do that again. Git commit -m chore. I usually have it set up to just stage and commit all in one go, which probably isn't the best practice to do. But so anyway, so we have now made our commit to our local repository on our chore initial state changes branch. So now what we need to do is we need to get this branch up into our remote repository, right? Because here, if we come in here and we go to where is it? Branch. There we go. If we go into branches, was I already there? I don't know. Anyway, let's see that we only have one branch, but we created another branch, right? But remember that branch that we created is in our local repository, not the remote repository. So what we'll say is, now that we've made our change, we're going to say git push -u origin, and then the name of the branch, which is initial, no, it was chore initial state changes. And so what that's going to do is it's going to make a branch on our remote repository and then push those changes that we made up to it. Now you can see it saying create a pull request for chore initial state changes on GitHub by visiting this URL. And so that's what we're going to do now, is show, okay, now that we've created that other branch, how can we then merge that branch into master? So if we come here and we go back here, you can see now we have two branches. So if we click that, we've now got our master branch and the chore initial state changes branch that we just made. When we go back here, we'll see we get this nice little message that says we recently pushed branches up, and do I want to compare and pull the request? We'll say yes, I want to compare and pull this request. You can do a whatever you want to put here. I usually just leave the same thing. If you have some more verbose stuff that you want to tack on here, like you had some real trouble with nailing down some bug, and you should maybe put in like kind of the process that you went through to do that, that'd be probably a good idea to do. Anything that will be helpful for either you later on or someone else who may be working on the code base later on, it's a good idea to write some sort of information in here about it. So go ahead and just create the pull request. And so now, see how this says continuous integration has not been set up. So this is where you would say, okay, I create a pull request, requesting that I pull this branch down and merge it with my master branch, right? But there's some things that I want to make sure are happening, right? I want to run some tests. And I want to make sure all those tests pass, right? Like, again, like I mentioned earlier about, you want to do some like end-to-end testing to make sure that, whatever changes we made didn't screw up the UI that we don't really know about, right? If we didn't really like sufficiently test to make sure that our UI looks good and everything, we can set up some continuous integration here that makes us check that before we can even merge that change into the master branch. So here, again, we're not really doing anything major. So we'll just say merge pull request. You can put in some more information here. I usually just leave this as is and then just say confirm merge. And now it's going to say merging. We've now merged this branch into master. And if we come over to our code base now, we can see that the last change that we made was from this commit, and it was from merging this branch into master. And so, and what's nice about GitHub here is you can see what files were affected by the last, by that last commit. But then if you look at like your commit history, and we'll just go to this first commit here, we can see all the changes that were made with that commit, and it just makes it so much better. So these are all green because these are all, we added all these files, right? Because they weren't even there before. So, all these are going to be green, but it'll tell you if there were, any sort of deletions, any sort of changes that were made on that commit. So again, if you have some problem that occurred after you made a commit, you can go back and you can see exactly what was changed, which is really, really super useful. So if we go back here and we click on our chore one, we can see there's only one file, and we see this nice little diff that tells us we've changed that 31 to a 30. Pretty cool. So again, let's go back to our code. So now one thing that I like to do once I'm done working on that branch, and I know it's something that like, hey, I'm probably not going to be working on that branch again. I'll just go back here and just delete that branch. And I also like to delete them on my local repository as well. And so that is, I think it's, so here's a good thing. So we're on that branch, so we can't delete that branch if we're on that branch, right? So let's go ahead and go git checkout, and we will go back to master. And if we look here, we'll go, okay, what's going on here? Because if I'm in my branch, right, like my chore initial state changes branch, this will be 1230. But when I'm in master, it goes back to 1231. And why is that? That is because our master branch in our local repository has not been updated, right? We made that merge in our remote repository here on GitHub. But how do we then pull those changes down into our master branch in our local repository? And that's real easy. We just say git pull. There's no tracking information for, let's say git pull origin master. There we go. So now we see that our change is now pulled down into our master branch, and now everything is in sync. The only thing is that we've deleted that branch on our remote repository, and we still have that branch here. Now, if you ever want to see what branches we have, you can just say git branch -a, and this is nice. It'll tell you your remotes, and then this one right here, am I getting that wrong? Anyway, it's showing you all the branches that we have for both remote and our local repository. So right now I want to go ahead and delete that one. So I'll say git branch, I think it's -d, and then we'll say chore initial state changes. Could have probably come up with another name. So now it's deleted that branch. Say git branch -a, and now we see just I probably need to. There's probably something that we need to do there where this is still so. Yeah, so this is the master branch that we're currently on. So that's why that's highlighted. This is our local branch of chore initial state changes, and then when we delete it, that one's gone. And this is still showing this other remote chore initial state changes, even though we deleted it on this side. So there's probably some other thing that probably need to do just to update the fact that initial state changes is also deleted on our remote repository. But that is pretty much kind of, Git in a nutshell. Another cool command, which we don't have anything here, but I could probably show it. If we could say Git Status, it'll tell us what branch we're on and if there's like some commits that haven't been made or anything like that. So I don't know, go ahead and save this and then say Git Status and see now it tells me that this file's been modified. Make sure to do a commit. I like to use that one a bit just to make sure that I'm not leaving anything on the table, so to speak. Run a Git Status and make sure, okay, all of my changes have been committed before I then push them up to my remote repository. So I like to do that one. If you've made changes, one cool thing about VS Code that I like is you want to revert changes for a specific file or anything like that. You can just go like that, discard those changes, and then that will take them out. And then, if I go Git Status again, we'll see that nothing to commit because we haven't made any changes. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good rundown of, obviously we showed how to add a project onto a new repository in GitHub. We kind of explained the difference between local repositories and remote repository, and what branches are, what those are useful for, how we can push changes, and how we can then create a pull request and then merge branches together. So I think that's a pretty good roundabout. I mean, there's a ton more in Git, and it's just a very, very useful tool for version control on any application. And it's really kind of the standard as far as if you're a developer now, you should really be using Git and be comfortable with Git and know sort of the ins and outs and at least the basics. So, which I think we covered pretty well in this video. I hope you learned a lot. Now that we have our repository up on GitHub, the next thing that we need to do is now deploy the sucker out to the web, which we will do starting next week. So I'll see you all then.